welcome to OT the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, and how to spend it. My name is Andy Green.
And with you is Felix Schultz. Andy, how are you?
Fantastic, Felix. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Nice weather, nothing to complain about fundamentally, which...
Double vax, nice weather, ready to party.
Yeah, we've got a great guest today.
Yes, what a lovely guy.
Were you going to tell us who it is, or...?
Silas Walton from A Collected Man, the founder of A Collected Man, in fact.
Yeah, one of the internet's premier sites. If you're looking for a rare or legitimately bonkers independent watch, The Collected Man's probably where you want to be heading.
Yeah,
that sounded like an ad. That wasn't an ad.
It's not today's sponsors. We both write for Collected Man. We've written
I've got
a bunch over the last 12 months.
I've got something I need to be writing more now. So now I'm stressed out about it. Oh no, that's right. I've got a few weeks. It's due in a few weeks. It'll be fine.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to talk to him a little bit. But Felix, what's been happening? What have you been liking? What's caught your attention lately?
This is a nice segue from A Collected Man. This watch could well be seen on A Collected Man, but if Collected Man was catering to my budget.
Okay.
It's the new Baltic MR01, and it's a fascinating watch. Are you across this one?
I am.
Dress watch.
Gone in the blink of an eye. Well,
yeah, I think there's got to be more. But so initially, this is the MR01, 200 pieces per color dial, and they were all gone. Mm-hmm. It's interesting in a few ways. So it's a dress watch, 36 mil, 8 millimeter case with a plus a bit for the crystal, acrylic crystal, which is a nice touch.
Cool.
Real Calatrava style with like sort of a grained dial. With a sort of really polished Breguet numerals, which is where that for me the Collected Man vibe comes in. Off center, small seconds, leaf style hands, classic proportions, beautiful. The really interesting thing for me is that it's a movement I wasn't familiar with before. An automatic micro rotor, which you don't see very much at all, made by a Chinese maker called Hangzhou. So not Seagull, plus 42 hours power reserve, plus 20 minus 20, which, isn't great, but it's also €650 with VAT.
Interesting.
Yeah. What do you think of this, Andy?
Yeah, really cool. These made quite the splash recently because they sold out so quickly. 200 Baltic just like flew, and people were a little bit upset that they missed out on that first run.
I think they'll do like a special. They've done it before where they've done like a numbered series and then a regular production series. I got a question for you. This watch sort of made me think about. So Baltic have been around for a couple of years now. Yeah,
yeah.
They've got super like the Aquascaf is a beautiful like heritage diver. They've got other divers. They've got dress watches. They've got chronos. They've got this sort of sort of modern take on a classic dress watch, and I don't think they've really put a foot wrong. Where do you think Baltic are going? Like, will they can only get bigger. Like, in 10 years' time, will they be like, I don't know. Yeah, sort of up there with, Longines? Will they get bought out by a group? What do you think sort of the future for this exciting young brand will be?
It's a good question, Felix.
I thought so.
We got there. I don't know why you would sell if you had an independent brand like this at this price point. Why you would sell that? Because to be honest, he's making really good money, and it's probably quite a small team.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's going to keep going though. Like that. Yeah, they haven't stepped wrong. They'll probably step wrong at some point. They'll probably upset some people with something. I haven't checked the resale prices on these watches or what people are listing their orders for, their slots for, but I imagine it's probably double or something. Yeah, it's tough. I don't know.
Or is that sort of old world thinking of like going, okay, the route to success must be, within a group or within a, getting bought out or taking on investment?
Honestly, like I don't see, like I can see it costing, say, a group more money integrating a new brand of this size than what they would actually pay for it. Like it would just be headaches. If it was Swatch Group, for example, switching all the movements over, switching everything over, like it'd be such a hassle. Does Baltic have a ceiling? Well, yeah, I mean they'll hit a ceiling.
Yeah.
They'll hit a price ceiling and they'll hit a production ceiling. and potentially demand ceiling. And yeah, okay, more investment or acquisition of a bigger group could help that. But
Yeah.
I mean, not every brand needs to be massive. Like
Yeah.
we've seen someone like FP Journe,
Yeah.
who is an enormous, who's doing a fantastic job, and it's sort of like, well, why would you keep?
Well, yeah, and I guess for me, this is like there aren't many, and it sort of reflects the space. Like it's easier to innovate and to be more exciting if you're, Jean or Richard Mille or someone. But in the last 20 or even 10 years, I can't think of too many exciting new players in the lower price point that have stuck around. Christopher Ward, maybe? Like they're probably one
Mm,
of the bigger ones in that, under 3K price point, let's say.
mm,
But otherwise, it seems to be a pretty static sort of space, and I wonder like who will have the staying power to last longer. Like I mean, go up against Tissot or Longines or even some maybe Tag Heuer if you're at the higher end. Or is it just always going to be a bit of a rotation of brands that stick around for 10, 15 years and sort of fade away? I don't know.
I don't either. I mean, yeah, you're right. There's some micro brands that have stuck it out and have grown nicely, and then there's plenty that have faded away to the wayside.
Mm. I don't know. I find it an interesting. Like it's for me. It's part of that you know the dearth of innovation at like at the lower end. Like we're not seeing too many exciting new brands or watches. Like I'm increasingly less and less excited by a lot of what the big brands are offering. I mean, not to sound negative, but it's pretty sort of iterative,
Mm,
and it's brands like Baltic or Autodromo or Anordain or someone like that. They're doing things that are like genuinely offering value or a new approach or something. Maybe they'll just get that we'll just see bigger brands taking those ideas and turning the mainstream. I don't know.
hey, good
Just
point.
I'm in
Good
a I'm
point.
in a ruminative mood.
I like it. Well, Felix,
Yeah.
I've been up to something pretty cool.
What have you been up
We
to,
both
mate?
have
Yes.
received a DHL package last week
Spe-
containing,
Speaking of great value micro brands,
containing our prototypes of our watch that we're doing.
what did you think? What was your
Love them.
first reaction? Like
Excited.
unboxing, that sort of feeling.
Just awesome. So weird to see something you've sort of had a little hand in, getting made. But they're hot. They're
Yeah,
very hot.
yeah, we caught up, and I had my first IRL look the other day, and I'll admit, like I was stressed about one of them in
Mm.
particular. Like I wasn't sure how it would translate from pictures, but I was very happy with how it translated to
I mean,
on
they are
wrist.
very hot. I'm very excited for people to see them. And
Yeah,
feel,
hopefully not long. I think in terms of we've got a little bit of feedback, but I
mm,
think we're very much in the final stretch.
no, it's fantastic. Do you know what they're almost as hot as? Tag Heuer's newest ambassador, Ryan Gosling.
Segue, Andy Green. I mean, I'm pretty sure. I mean, this is probably a terrible breach of Mr. Gosling's new contract, but he's on the list.
Mm.
He's expressed interest in one of our
Legally, we
prototypes.
can't confirm
Mm.
if he has.
This is a parody. It's a parody podcast. No, Ryan
Potentially.
Gosling. What
Yeah.
do you think of Gosling announced as in Hollywood as the new ambassador alongside their new sort of three-hand Carrera collection?
I mean,
Is it what you expected?
I'm in two minds because he does, they're obviously they're making a big deal out of the fact that he doesn't have social media, which to me feels like a negative in 2021. Look, I get that you don't have to be on there, but it's sort of like additional value out of an ambassador. If you're going to pay all that money, you may as well kind of reach that younger demographic through it. So I kind of feel like, and you're going to get less incidental images of him, like, oh, maybe hopping on there and doing something, wearing one of their watches.
Less BuzzFeed articles of Ryan
There's like a
Gosling.
lot less buzz about him, and you kind of that sort of means you only really hear about him when he's doing big work or something like this. And don't get me wrong, I love Ryan Gosling, and I also appreciate that it's very hard to find an A list that has that universal appeal that
I
isn't
mean,
already
maybe
signed.
the sort of the inference of the doesn't have social media is hasn't been an ambassador for a lot of things before, so this is a more
Mm,
meaningful partnership in to get Ryan Gosling off the bench, into the commercial fray. is significant. But like for a brand fit, do you think it makes sense? Comparing, I guess we've got to compare it to, Hemsworth as the sort of outgoing A-lister.
My honest take, it's hot. The Hemsworth is a better fit.
Yeah, I mean, but there's was a better fit when he was like doing mainline Marvel stuff. Like, whereas I don't think he's got maybe one more Marvel movie in him.
And then what will he do? He'll just be mainstream for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't
Gosling's
know. My
little.
main thing about Ryan, like, really great, like great reputation, great body of work. I'm sure will speak well for the brand. I would have expected someone a bit younger. Or younger appealing, not necessarily younger, but someone with more of a. I could be wrong. Maybe the kids love the
That's where the
Goss.
social media thing comes into play, right?
Yeah, true.
So it's interesting. It's an interesting choice. It's a great choice. He's a fantastic actor. He's probably one of my favorite actors.
Really?
Yeah, he's
Really,
fantastic.
Andy?
He's great. La La Land. I mean,
I haven't
amazing.
seen it. La La Land holds
Really? You
no
haven't seen
appeal.
it?
No appeal.
Oh,
Haven't
no,
seen.
you should
I
watch
haven't
it.
seen The Notebook either. Again, zero
Watch
appeal
La La
to
Land.
watch.
You'll like La La Land. It's good. It's
Yeah,
good. It's quality.
I don't
It's
know.
quality viewing.
Does that fall into Ryan Gosling teaching people about jazz? Like, you know what I mean?
Just watch it.
All right. I did love Blade Runner. I will. I don't know. I'm on the fence. Do you know what I'm not on the fence about?
What's that?
My employer, Revolution,
Uh-huh.
have been working on a project, and they've
Yes, they
launched that
have.
project, the Pink Dial project. So this is it's a charity auction. It's their second. So they had one last year, I believe, called the Oddballs. This one is, as you might guess from the pink theme, tied into breast cancer awareness. And they have got together a quite astonishing array of unique pieces featuring pink. And what do you think of that, Andy?
Great initiative, of course. Props to Revolution doing their bit for charity. What do I think of the
Any
contributions so far?
any lots you've seen that stand out?
I mean, that Anodyne popped up just yesterday, I think, or today.
Sure. And the Zenith, I think there's a
Zenith looks
Zenith.
cool.
That's pretty cool. What else?
There's an IWC.
Oh yes, that's bold.
That's kind of hot.
Actually, speaking of Ryan Gosling, there's a pink Tag Heuer Aqua Racer, like the smaller size one, that I think is quite cool.
Pink is in. Pink is the color.
Pink. There's a Bulgari Octofinissimo that's got like a little pink detail on the second hand. That's quite cool. But there's someone a bit closer to home. I thought that's
yes. I mean, Julie Krauss put a pink print in.
technically a dial. I mean,
Technically
it's a
a
picture
dial.
of a dial.
Picture of a dial of a Tank Louis Cartier. Pink, her first coloured print, which is really cool. For those who don't know Julie Krauss, she's like an illustrator, so really, really talented. Spends hundreds of hours drawing,
like
watches
hyper
with
realistic
graphite.
pencil drawings.
Yeah, it's fantastic work. She's just dropped a Tank Louis Cartier limited edition print, 100 of them, 20 inches by 30 inches. I've bought one.
Nice.
Be my third. Got a few.
Weren't tempted to hold out for the pink one?
Well, I didn't know about the pink one.
Yeah, mate.
So,
Mate.
but my third print. So the house is getting full of her watch prints, which is awesome to see. She's lovely as well.
Yep.
We both met her the same day, at the same time, at the same place.
Oh, we did too. Again, Tag Heuer. Coming back to Tag Heuer.
She was yes, she's done some work for Tag Heuer actually. There you go, full circle.
She was doing an Ortavia illustration at the time. God.
Yes, that's right, out the front of the Tag Heuer booth. Time flies. Okay, so quick update for you, Felix.
What?
Far Cry 6 came out.
Oh, yeah, Hamilton.
We've talked about this in the past.
Yep.
Yes.
They had a little
played it, downloaded it last night, played it far enough to get the Hamilton watch.
Okay.
And I tapped out. So
have you met Juan Carlo Esposito yet?
Yeah. No. This is like
he's a baddie. Yeah, he's like the big baddie.
But I did meet the pet alligator.
Oh, nice.
Guapo. Yeah. So we've been hanging out.
I've seen that on TikTok.
Yes, he's a lot of fun. There'll be more updates probably next week because I'm not going to do any work and just play that. But yeah, let's take a quick break and come back.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
This week, we are pleased to have the wonderful Nomos Glasute back as our sponsor. They've just released some really funky new takes on the Autobahn. Let's get into it.
Okay, Andy. So the Autobahn was first released in 2018 as an automotive-inspired design that sounds miles away from the sleek, paired-back look of Nomos. Ooh. But this is not a sporty chronograph. It's a sleek and sophisticated take on the genre that plays with colour, shape, and line in surprising ways. With bold curves and depths, it's a fascinating exercise in dial design, and the reference to the dash gauge is tastefully done. Now, Andy, the Autobahn was designed by Werner Eislinger, a renowned German designer who lent his creative flair to these 3 limited edition director's cuts.
Love it. But before we talk about those 3, Felix, I've been wearing a regular production Autobahn for the last few weeks. In fact, the Midnight Blue model. And I love the balance of the dial with the loom up top and the sectored date wheel down at 6 o'clock. Its elongated shape flows beautifully up the nicely curved dial and into that unmissable blue ring of superluminova. It sits really nicely at 41 millimeters. There's a present, but it's still a really slim case at just 10.5 millimeters. In addition, that woven textile strap is really comfortable on the wrist.
And of course, Andy, the new limited editions have the same case dimensions, but they're bringing some heat in the strap department.
Tell me more, Felix.
All right. These 3 limited editions are in effect a 3-way street. A3, A7 and A9, they're each named for major German freeways. They stand out with very fresh new colourways and a retro fantastic bracelet. The A3 is in white, orange and red, A7 blue and yellow, and A9 in black and grey. It's very fun and reminiscent of German cars from the 60s and 70s. Which brings us, Andy, to the bracelet.
Absolutely. It's a really awesome 70s inspired rally style bracelet with a Nomos deployment clasp. It's a real vibe and another neat Werner Asslinger touch.
100% Andy. To me, these watches really show off Nomos's confidence with bold designs and colour, and those incredible 3D dials and smart colour choices, not to mention the fun loom. Andy, which is your pick?
Oh, it's a tough pick, but I'm drawn to the yellow and the blue. But I do think there's something really unique about the black on grey.
Look, I'm with you on the yellow and blue. That would be my choice.
Okay, Felix. So each of these watches is powered by the Neomatic DUW 6101 caliber, which has been adjusted to chronometer standards, and each watch is limited to just 175 pieces each. They retail at 6,760 Australian dollars. It's worth noting that those super cool bracelets will be unique to these editions.
Find out more and visit nomos-glasuter.com. That's nomos-glasuette.com. You can also buy it on the site, as well as online retailers like Mr. Porter and local Australian authorised dealers.
Bingo. Felix, let's get back to the show.
Andy, enough talk about fine German craftsmanship. Let's turn our focus back to London and chat to Silas Walton about the wonderful world of connoisseurship and high-end collecting.
Let's get him on.
In a world where dealers use Instagram for attention and only trade in hype pieces, Silas Walton, a founder of A Collected Man, plays a different game. ACM focuses on selling rare, obscure and intricate timepieces, which are mostly vintage, independent, or both. At the same time, A Collected Man is heavily invested in creating quality content. Welcome to OT the Podcast, Silas Walton.
Thanks, Felix. Thanks, Andy. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you here, mate. Hope you like the intro. Tell us a little bit more about A Collected Man. How and why did it start?
Sure. So originally it started about 7 years ago, but it wasn't A Collected Man back then. It was called Watch Exchange, slightly less glamorous, more of a foray into kind of mid-market. It was kind of an experiment to sort of test the waters for selling things online and using social media to kind of help or achieve or catalyze that. Basically, after about 6 months of doing that, I just realized that there was a lot more of a potential interest and demand at the kind of rare end of the spectrum, where there was much less activity, but there was also, there were far few people actively present in that space. There was only really, for example, Steve Halleck in California who was doing indies. And after a couple of years, as we kind of specialized more and more in rare, and we became, pretty much exclusively online, I decided that the time had come to change the name to something that was just a little bit less commercial. It was something that I wanted to change for a long time to kind of reflect the fact that the area of the market we were in was a lot less commoditized, a lot more about storytelling and provenance and understanding context. And that's why we changed the name about 5 years ago, I think it was, to A Collected Man. And we've kind of been going ever since.
Even before, the formal business side of Collected Man kicked off, what sort of started your personal interest in watches, and particularly that love of independent horology?
Yeah, so I always find myself in a sort of slightly tricky position, because the truth is I started off with an appreciation for horology and an appreciation for watchmaking, but I wasn't a watch guy. I'm always kind of reasonably upfront about that. What happened subsequently is that I became a watch guy almost, without intending to. So I kind of, I got my great grandfather's pocket watch when I was 18. I'd got my other great grandfather's pocket watch, I think, when I was 21. So I was definitely interested. I'd spent my first couple of paychecks on watches. So, I'm not suggesting that there wasn't like a thing there. But I would never have, if you'd asked me at the time, are you a watch guy? I wouldn't have said I was a watch guy. I was just someone who happened to really like intricate and interesting and beautiful things. And I liked how it felt, owning, holding, wearing these watches. And essentially, I got into the business because I saw an opportunity, and it was the market that kind of first opened my eyes to this particular space. And then one particular collector who kind of introduced me to independence that had, a sort of disproportionate impact, a guy called David Sitwell in London. And then essentially, fast forward 2, 3, 4 years, as the business kind of settled down and things started to sort of develop their own pace, and it wasn't just kind of living on the edge of your seat and worrying about cash flow and stressing about where the next month's sales would come from. I started to sort of think about what I liked, and I started to collect watches, and I started with some vintage pieces, and then progressively I started to kind of trade my personal watches. I had my first big watch was a 3940 in white gold, which I really loved. It was slim, it was felt, it felt great under the cuff. I loved the micro rotor movement. I loved the dial design. I was literally writing a sort of 50-word blurb, I think, for a finance magazine, where they were asking me to kind of recommend watches that their readers could potentially be interested in, and that were undervalued potentially. And I finished writing that blurb having recommended 3940s, and I just thought to myself, what am I doing? I'm recommending something that I'm not, really doing myself. It felt very kind of inauthentic and fake. And so I literally went on Chrono24, and within half an hour, I'd reached out to someone in London who I happened to kind of vaguely know, who had exactly what I liked and coveted. And by the end of the day, I'd met him and bought the watch. And that kind of that was probably where my real collecting started, and then progressively ebbed and flowed until the point where I reached today, where it's primarily independent or neo vintage. So I have I've got a Recep Recepi. I've got a Daniel Roth steel tourbillon from back in the day, an AP Star Wheel from back in the day. What else? A VC skeletonized perpetual that they made in the 90s that I'm really fond of. I'm waiting for a Roger Smith, which I ordered 4 years ago, which I'm really looking forward to finally taking delivery of this year. But it really it went almost from one extreme to the other. It went from, not being a priority, being, stuff that I could, buy with a month's paycheck or whatever, stuff that was, reasonably accessible, micro brand kind of price range, to eventually to a point where I kind of, 5, 6, 7 years later have found myself kind of putting all my eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating. It's a lovely Patek. I think I've stolen it off your wrist once or twice. It's an interesting and slippery slope. Especially kind of talking about the brands and the section of the watch market that you focus on, and 5-6 years ago, these brands were not hot. They weren't selling for premiums. They were, nearly all of these brands, bar probably, Roger Smith, was selling for, were depreciating, right? So and you weren't collecting these pieces at the time. You weren't a independent collector. So I'm curious to kind of dig a little deeper into how you actually saw the potential for this market, probably before everyone else did. Like you saw, you kind of mentioned it was just Steve Halleck in the US doing it. What drew you to it if you weren't a collector and you weren't sort of already in the space?
So, trying to think how that started. I think I was very lucky because I came across this collection of a really kind of interesting range of indies: Dufour, Smith, Voutilainen, Laurent Ferrier, loads of other interesting stuff, MBMF, de Bethune, from this one collector in London. And I was obviously completely unfamiliar with that space. I'd never heard of any of the names, any of the watchmakers. I knew Cartier, I knew Longines, I knew Patek, Rolex, etc. But it was a completely new space to me. So it took a long time to kind of familiarize and understand. But because I was still very much wearing a sort of business hat at the time, I understood that when I kind of looked around, there was clearly like a gap. There was clearly a gap for a certain type of collector to be able to provide a service to that person trying to find the harder to find, the more niche indie watches. But personally, I think it was when I went and met them. In the first couple of years, I flew out and went to see Roger on the Isle of Man, maybe, I don't know, not 10 times, but somewhere between 5 and 10 times. Carrie, I flew to Geneva and drove to Moitié, went to see him, probably a similar number of times. Philippe, whenever he was available, I'd take him to lunch, or I'd go and visit him at his atelier, or we'd meet in Geneva. And so I think I had a kind of a very rapid induction into the world of independent watchmaking over the space of maybe a year and a half. And I think that as I kind of got to know the watchmakers, and then as I got to know the watches, you suddenly started to kind of connect the dots and realize that, it's funny. I don't know to what extent, when you own a really good Submariner or a Daytona or a really good Patek or any watch of a certain caliber, I don't know to what extent you feel a connection to the brand. You might feel a connection to the product. You might feel excited about the aesthetic. It might be attached to a memory or something you bought it for a special occasion. But when you're buying a watch made by an independent watchmaker, it's just so crystal clear that that their horological DNA is in the watch. You're absolutely 100% buying a piece of art. The watchmaker is an artist, and the watch is art, and it sounds corny and tacky and cheesy, but it really is true. It's you can see exactly how Carrie got to where he is today just by rewinding 10 years, 12 years, and looking at where he started, and you can just follow his path over several hundred watches. And every single watch of his is uniquely and identifiably his. And you visit his watchmaking atelier, and it's exactly what you expect. It's although he's just opened up a couple of other places, his home is basically a sort of a kind of watchmaking castle kind of thing. And Roger lives on the Isle of Wight, relatively isolated from the rest of the world. And that was a choice, obviously, that George made a long time before, George Daniels, and Roger joined him. And you can, that there's something imbued in his watches that is kind of isolated and remote. It's very kind of independent. It's very, I'll do things my way. I know what I represent. I know what I like. And, I'm very happy for you to be a client, and I'm, very happy to discuss ideas with you, but understand that this is still an expression of my vision of the world. And I think, like, when I got to a point where I understood that after a couple of years, it just became a rabbit hole. And, it went deeper and deeper.
Solid.
Now, if you don't mind, I'd just like to pivot for a second from the craft of watchmaking to sort of the business for a second. I'm sure we'll get back to the art. Watches as investments or an asset class are one of the hot topics at the moment. Everyone seems to have an opinion on it. Just the other week, we had a Robin Swithenbank on, and he quite memorably called it very vulgar in a spectacularly British way. Silas, from your take as someone sort of, at the coalface of watches, investment grade watches, what do you think about this sort of discourse and trend?
So yeah, I definitely don't disagree with Robin. I wouldn't call it vulgar, but I understand where he's coming from. I think that the reason you buy a watch should primarily be an emotional one. It shouldn't be a financial one. It's very easy to say. I know it comes across high and mighty, especially if you're in the business of selling watches like I am. But I think that there are many other things that you can buy or invest in that obviously don't involve craft and don't involve, potentially buying something that somebody else can't buy as a result because you've got it. And I just think that if that's your main reason for doing it, you should probably look at other things. Is my honest take. That being said, I think it would be naive of me to suggest that isn't present, at least as an element of a decision-making process for most people, including myself. So I think it's just a question of how you balance it. I would say you should never buy something that your heart doesn't want more than your brain. Otherwise, you'll get bored of it, you'll put it away, and it will just be a missed opportunity, and ultimately, from an economic point of view, a misuse of capital. If investing in watches is your thing purely, then by all means do that. But it's not how I would approach it. It's not how I would recommend people approach it. I would say try and identify what motivates you, what excites you in watchmaking. Figure out, for example, with independence, what values you potentially share, or what you think. What watchmakers you think are doing something cool, and get excited about it. And then if you happen to make money about it, great. But I can assure you that when I started this, the vast majority of people who collected independence knowing that they would lose money. It was a 20, 30, sometimes 40% haircuts. And that was true even a couple of years ago with certain brands. So you collected independent watchmaking. You went into independent watchmaking because often you collected everything else, and maybe you were a bit bored, and you wanted something that was a bit different and unique, and you wanted to support, for example, an individual or a small team, and that was a really great reason, I think, to collect indies. I think it would be a shame if that was overly lost. But I, of course, as I said, recognize that people have to think about a lot of different things, and the world is moving very quickly. But I don't think it should be the primary factor in decision making at any point.
It's really good advice and a great kind of perspective. I like it, and it's something that has really surprised Felix and I think a lot of people, is this sort of indie boom that we're getting. And before I kind of get your take on why it's happening, as someone who's so close to the makers and to the market, I'm just curious sort of what changes for you when, a watch that you used to buy of someone and, they're used to getting a haircut is now exponentially more expensive. And hype is attached to it, right? Like these, something like an FP Journe, most models that they sell are now, considered hype models. How does that sort of impact or change the way that, a business like yours operates, in the sense that, it's the niche has sort of changed on you?
So I think FP Journe is a really good example, because I think last year we were particularly active in that space, and so I think we were very much at the coalface, to borrow your expression, and so we saw things firsthand, and there were definitely moments, multiple moments, I would say, in the year where the price jumps suddenly just felt uncomfortable relative to what we'd been doing for the previous 6 months or 9 months. And so in moments like that, everybody sort of takes a breather and second guesses the market. And I think that, internally, you have a discussion with your colleagues and you say, well, isn't this crazy? We literally can't buy anything anymore because the expectations from the sellers are disproportionate in our eyes to the market. I.e., what they think something is worth is perhaps worth more than you even think you can sell it for. But what we learned, I think we learned two things with that market in particular. The first is that there are real geographical trends and geographical markets. So the market, for example, in North America is very different today and certainly then for FP Journe than it was in Europe. The pace of change, the growth of the market, the growth of prices, the appreciation of the brand was kind of rocketing ahead in North America at a far greater pace than I would say anywhere else in the world in 2020. And so you kind of just sort of have to ask yourself, just because you're used to perhaps benchmarking off your local markets, maybe you're kind of looking in the wrong place. So that's the first thing. I think when these things happen, you have to try and understand. If maybe your kind of optics are misaligned. And then the second thing is, and I remember having this conversation really, really frankly with my colleagues, if you believe in something, which we absolutely do, as regards to FP Journe and particularly the pieces that we are kind of specializing on the rare end, if you believe the fundamentals are rock solid and the brand is succeeding for a reason and has been underappreciated for a long time for a reason, then all you have to decide is how willing you are to kind of keep your skin in the game and how willing you are to kind of like to effectively step up and pay a high premium for something that might seem a bit shocking a few months ago, on the assumption that you're not just crazy, you're not the last man standing. When the music stops, you're not going to lose your chair. And I think we did have a couple of moments where we kind of like held our breath. But it always worked out, and we definitely had moments where we paused and we didn't buy or sell anything for like a month, deliberately to see. I didn't want us to be overly influencing the market. I didn't want to be responsible for anything untoward happening, and I definitely didn't want to be, as I said, the guy pushing, the business pushing something that then resulted in some kind of burst bubble. And I think what's fascinating, and I've said this to a lot of people since, is we've been less present in that market today because there's loads of other interesting stuff happening, and it's just you have to choose where you kind of put your money, place your bets, etc. And there's always a finite amount of options. But Journe has not gone anywhere other than in a very positive direction. The brand. There was a time. And this is probably not the sort of thing I should be saying, but there was a time when, you could buy Journe on the grey market and we didn't. We don't participate in the grey market. It's not what we do. But you could buy Journe for minus 20, 30%. Even a couple of years ago, we were offered pieces. And then suddenly that came to an end about a year ago. And now effectively several years worth of sales are locked up. The brand has several years worth of orders. There's significantly more demand than supply. And that's not created by an artificial constraint on their part. Nothing has changed on their part. It's just that the demand has massively increased. And I just think it's kind of, Journe are probably an excellent example of one of the bigger independent brands that could almost, be categorized as a very small normal brand. Although I wouldn't, I'd keep them in the former. That have just kind of have managed it really well. They're still led by a brilliant watchmaker who is headstrong and very, very kind of heavily directive of their approach. Very original ideas. They come up with new stuff all the time, but they don't rush it. They don't move too far away from their DNA. They're bold in terms of, for example, being involved in pre-owned and opening their own boutiques. and they look after their clients through the various organizations that they have, like the Journe Club, Journe Society rather. And, it's probably an example for others to follow. If you even if you're an indie making 600 to 900 watches a year, if you manage your business well, like many do, like Roger, like Carrie, like Recep, you will get to a point where you have a really nice established brand. You have a community of collectors who are desperately interested in what you're doing and want to support you. And you can afford to invest with a degree of confidence in your operations and your structures, so you don't have to worry about the next drop. You don't have to worry about the next financial crisis, because you've got a year or two or 3 or 4 years of pipeline. Look at Roger Smith. He's closed the books for new clients. He's got more than 7 years worth of orders. It's a really interesting time.
Yeah, great answer. I think Journe is a fascinating one, and it's sort of I like you kind of commented on not wanting to influence the market. I think we sort of said it in the intro. You've heavily invested in these brands. You're heavily invested in sort of creating content, the way you present these brands that are obscure and rare, and people were taking a haircut on you. You were okay to sort of not only buy these watches and sell them, but invest in sort of telling the story of these brands, meeting the you're not selling these watches and you're going and meeting the makers to kind of grow this section of the market. And I think that's an amazing thing to be doing. And do you ever kind of stop back and think that you may have had a really kind of positive influence on the independent side of watches in general? Because you sort of said that the US is booming for Journe, and I'm sure it's applicable for other brands. But do you think it's fair to say that you've had quite an impact on the market in general?
I'd like to think that we have we've helped maybe catalyze existing changes, and we've maybe helped people get a kind of fresh and more informed perspective on perhaps what those brands represent and the values that they represent, and the stories of the watchmakers. One of the one of the most influential moments of my professional career was, randomly a summer job that I had when I think I was like 19. I worked in Harrods for the summer. I was working in one of the departments selling Harrods branded stuff, and I think being instructed and made clear that if you're working on the sales floor, your job isn't to interrupt the client, isn't to push the client or the shopper rather to kind of buying something. Your job is to be there, available, within reach to answer questions without being kind of intimidating, without being pressurizing, without being obnoxious. And if you can be helpful, and that leads to someone buying something, all the better. But like ultimately, it's about just kind of providing all the information possible in the most enjoyable and attractive kind of context possible for that person then to make an independent decision. And I think that's the approach we've tried to take. I don't know if we've always succeeded, but whether it's content, which no one in the world will read if it's just basically advertising. No one will be interested if you're effectively just pushing a product. The only way to kind of, I think, create credibility and to add value in situations like this is to provide informed, researched, and considered information in a format where ultimately it's up to the reader, for example, to decide if they believe you, if they think you're serious and you're right, if they are able to kind of like divorce the fact that you're a seller, and therefore ultimately there's a presumed bias that this is essentially a commercial exercise. But I think what's great in our space, to be completely frank, is we started off with where the only direction was up, in the sense that if you're selling something, everyone expects you to just be, a cliche. Everyone expects you to just push something and they don't have high expectations, they're mistrustful, etc., etc. And that was certainly the case when I started the business. And so everything you can do to take the edges off, everything you can do to surprise, and to kind of, to allow people to kind of perhaps move past an understandable degree of cynicism and pessimism, is useful. But no one will be disappointed if suddenly we stop doing that stuff, as long as we continue offering the watches that we do. But in my eyes, there's a lot more that can be done, and there's a lot more to it. And if we can, provide a degree of education or create some kind of like sharing around information that previously was basically held super close to the chest by a handful of people, then I think that's a good thing, and I hope that that's what we can continue to do. And if that means that we're influencing the market, all the better.
I had a question lined up, Silas, but you've done a very, very neat job of answering it already. So I'll turn it into a more of a follow-up remark if I can. 100%. I think that's what really impresses me about a collected man, in someone that is Andy and I both involved in writing editorial.
Some great articles.
We're both involved in writing editorial for you.
Some particularly good ones.
Yeah, I mean, no, fair play to Russell's sort of guidance there, which is very, very good, and sort of makes him sort of very astute. You focus on things that I often can't see a clear commercial output. Like, often you'll do these sort of things. It's like, guys, we're gonna push vintage Cartier this week, or whatever it is. And I think that it comes back to that sort of that Harrods mentality that you were saying. And that's the reason why I think your editorial is held up as amongst the best, like not just sort of sales patter editorial, but like watch journalism online at the moment. And I think that's quite remarkable. And is that the sort of the future of this? Like, good independent authoritative writing backed by separate but related commerce?
100%. I apologize. The line kind of it was a bit fragmented, but I picked up certainly. I think the lion's share of what you said, and I'll be sure to tell Russell he can keep his job.
It was all compliments, basically.
Very good, very good. Look, maybe actually, maybe I should reference one other kind of professional experience I had that probably I've never thought about before, but that has had some kind of impact on me today. I did after I went to business school, I did an internship in private equity in London, an unpaid internship that I had to do as part of my master's, and it was with a P fund called LDC, Lloyd's Development Capital, and basically they were the last captive P fund in the UK, and captive means that they were basically funded off the balance sheet as opposed to by fundraising. They were still run as part of Lloyd's banking group. And I think what was fascinating to me then was the amount of kind of flexibility that it gave them to be able to invest in things that they wanted to invest in, because essentially they didn't have to worry about going out to the market, whatever it was, every year or every 2 years, and raising capital. They had the support of a financial institution with significant amounts of money available to invest in things that they felt confident about, and it allowed them to focus on their job. And I think the only comparison that I would draw is there is a fantastic advantage being an autonomous business that's financed very clearly and transparently by the sale of watches, but with no other kind of connection at all. And I'm not suggesting for a second that those other ways of doing things aren't fantastic and don't work, for the better of the community. But I think just in our specific example, what I enjoy is the fact that ultimately we can write whatever we want. We're having conversations right now internally about being a little bit more opinionated and leading with some editorial that's perhaps a little bit more, let's say, personal and maybe not quite as finely balanced as we might have gone for in the past to avoid upsetting the apple cart. And I'm not suggesting we're going to be kind of going in any kind of crazy direction, but I think that at a certain point you start to lean into your advantages, and our big advantage is that we're self-funded. We sell watches, everybody knows it. And if you're okay with that, then come and read what we write and know that it's written by some incredibly talented people, both of yourselves included. And it's there has never ever been a conversation internally where we say to people on the editorial team, we're going to be selling this stuff next week, or this big piece is coming next week. Can you put something up to kind of support that? Sometimes, genuinely coincidentally, it happens if the schedule is like the editorial schedule will be fixed several months in advance, whereas the watch listing schedule can change at the absolute last minute if there's an issue with servicing or the photographer couldn't finish something, etc., or if even cash flow requires it. But quite often the reverse is true. We will literally pull a watch from a schedule where we realize even on the day that it will come across as potentially clashing. We put up an article last week on ultra slim automatic perpetuals, focusing on Patek, AP, and Vacheron, which was a lot of work. And after we put up the article, one of my colleagues kind of walked up to me and said, I've just realized that we're putting up an automatic perpetual Patek this afternoon, not from that era, but nevertheless an automatic perpetual. And actually that might, look pretty crap. So do you think we should swap it out? And so, that person then had to sit down and write a watch description in an hour and a half under pressure to make sure that we could still list the watch before everyone went home. Simply because we'd realized that perhaps it would come across the wrong way. So for the future, 100%, the aim is to do more and more, and hopefully to pursue higher and higher quality of content. We've not done video fully for one simple reason: we haven't had the capacity and capability to do it properly. So when we do it, it's ad hoc and it's with outside partners and producers that we have a huge amount of time for, and we want to continue working with. But we've simply not had the bandwidth to be able to do it properly here. And there's no point doing it at all if you can't do it properly and consistently. And now we're moving to a new office. We're going to hire an in-house videographer for the first time after 5 years of saying we do it, because we have the physical space to do it. And that's going to become part of what we do. But it's on the, it won't be to try and, reinvent the wheel. It will be to try something that adds value to the other things we do, content included, whilst also investing in and continuing to invest in written content and anything else that we can do that's interesting. And if people want to read our articles and view our watches, view our videos, fantastic. If it results in a sale, even better. I'm not going to complain. But for me, that's the future of this industry. It's not being a straightforward, simple kind of sales platform. It's being somewhere that people come to one day to buy something, the next minute just to read an article, and the following day to watch a video. It's you've got to be multifaceted, I think, to be relevant.
I love that. I love that, and I love everything about it. Silas, I got to ask you. We're talking a lot about independence. We're talking about the boom. We're talking about that market going crazy. What do you think's next? What do you think the next big thing is that is just going to absolutely take off?
So I think it's I get that question a lot. It's tricky to say because sometimes the fundamentals are just super clear, and so you can see that something's gonna something's in the water, so to speak. And even if it's not happening now, you can be clear that it's gonna happen at some point in the near future, because it should and it deserves to. And generally that's what happens when other things become too expensive. People kind of start to shift their attention to areas that are more affordable, that have the same potential. So, an area that maybe is not the next one to come, because I think it's already happening, is very clearly neo-vintage, kind of neo-vintage watchmaking. That's an area that we've kind of been very actively involved in for several years. So, I'm conscious that you should take whatever I say with a pinch of salt, because I fundamentally believe in the market. Personally, I collect those pieces. Professionally, we sell them. But there's a fantastic amount of value in watchmaking from a whole range of brands in a period that historically was not really given much attention, because it didn't fall in, say, the vintage period. It was, let's say, post 70s, post even 80s, early 80s. But where brands were, trying their best to innovate. They were responding to the quartz crisis. They were, facing an existential threat to their continued existence. And Audemars Piguet, for example, and I know Jasper mentioned this on his episode a couple of weeks ago, but also Vacheron, Patek, other people were trying new things. They were inventing micro rotors or introducing micro rotors. They were introducing ultra slim perpetual calendars. They were introducing steel sports watches, which obviously today everyone thinks that Nautiluses and Royal Oaks and other pieces of that ilk were kind of the hottest thing and have been forever, but they weren't. They were a response to something. They were an attempt to kind of push the envelope, and they were a bold experiment that could have gone wrong. And yes, it's a bit of a kind of an old trope to say, they weren't particularly successful when they were released. But there is a degree of truth to that. And, if I look today at, the ultra slim perpetual calendars that, as again, Jasper mentioned that we've been, champions of for a long time too, the fundamentals of how those watches are designed, where they came from, in AP's case, basically they were a secret project by watchmakers done in the shadows for fear of not being approved by the person in charge of giving the green light to new products at AP, until something was ready to be shown, something of a finished product rather than a concept. And when those, when that watch was presented at AP, I can't remember the exact year. It was a revolutionary moment, and I think that just like people can point to other interesting and important inflection points in the history of watchmaking, I think this will come to be one of the most significant, because from that creation was birthed a whole new generation of and styles of design, and I think reinvigorated a lot of the brands that potentially were facing a very difficult and dark period. And I think that what's interesting is that it's not just that people are looking to fundamentals about quality of watchmaking, movement, calibers, etc., design. It's not just that they're looking at story and provenance. It's not just that they're looking at price point and therefore accessibility relative to other parts of the market that perhaps are overinflated. It's also simply that trends are changing. When I started this, the only thing that you could hear people talk about was 42, 43, 44, 45 millimeter cases. It was, oversized watches. And today, watches are, it's not something that, it's not just people saying it. It's very clearly the case that there is a rapid appreciation for smaller case watches, possibly led by Southeast Asian tastes, but I don't think that's, I think that's an oversimplification. I think that across the board and across the world, people are increasingly interested in watchmaking, but they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily looking for something that's quite as much of a presence on the wrist as they might have been before. And I think that lends itself to an interest in neo-vintage as well, because those case sizes were similar, similarly 35, 36, 34. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that was a great answer. And I'm conscious that we're sort of heading towards the end of our chat here, but I did want to get your take on an area that fascinates me, and I find is perhaps one of the less sexy aspects of old, independent, complicated watches, and that is servicing. I had a chat a while ago with someone, and he had a simple, Vianney halter that he had Vianney service for around 10,000 Swiss francs. So, that is not your, standard or cheap service, but it is, I think, something that the market and collectors that might sort of be only a few years into this new and exciting world of vintage independent watches, not what am I trying to say? The other shoe might not have dropped yet in terms of the requirements in skill and components that go into this. Do you have thoughts on the future of this sort of servicing? Is that something that you're looking at getting involved in, or is it a growth area?
So you have to keep in mind that obviously many of the independents are operating with very small teams, and they have so they don't have much manpower. They have to often operate in a cash flow world that's quite tight. And if they're servicing a watch, there's a degree of truth to the idea that they're not making a new watch that could, potentially be much more lucrative for them. And so there's a cost associated with that. There's an opportunity cost, I suppose. That being said, with tremendous respect for Vianney, I think he's much more of an exception than the rule. I think you would struggle to find an example of the cost of watchmaking, servicing and independent watchmaking that is more elevated than Vianney's for a time-only watch. So I would say take that with a very big pinch of salt, because it's something
an extreme.
everyone's aware of. It's definitely an extreme. You service a Journe that's basically fine, but needs, maybe it's a octet réserve de marche, or it's a connoisseur-grade, etc. You're looking at a couple of grand. It's not cheap for sure, but it's very comparable, I think, to Patek by and large. So I would say that the first point is that I wouldn't take Vianney's servicing costs as a benchmark. I understand how it gets to that point. I understand why he charges what he does. I sympathize. I think there's a reason. It's possibly one of the reasons why there's less activity in that market, because people are aware that it's a potential headache down the line, particularly if you're looking at, for example, the Antiqua. But look, it's fantastic watchmaking by a hyper-talented watchmaker, and at a certain point, you kind of just decide if it's something that you're prepared to kind of stomach or not. And I would just recommend going in eyes wide open and doing extra research before you commit around servicing costs, if that's something that potentially you'd want to be aware of in advance. Servicing otherwise, it's not something that we want to be present in. We're very fortunate. We work with, on the vintage side, I think we work with one of the absolute best servicing agents in the world. I won't mention who they are for security reasons, but they know, and they're super, super talented here in the UK. Then otherwise, we pretty much send everything to the brands these days. We factor that into our cash flow. We factor that into it's the only way you can really do what we do, in the sense that we give a 2-year warranty. And things absolutely go wrong. Don't get me. Sometimes we'll sell a watch that we think is perfectly fine. We've tested, and it turns out that it has a problem the following week, and we have to deal with that, and that's on us. But by and large, by doing it this way, by including a servicing, for example, in the sale price of a watch, which we do very frequently now, a Journe or a Roger Smith or a Voutilanen or a Dufour, it's. So, for example, like the Grande Petite Sonnerie that we sold recently, that included a 15,000 Swiss franc servicing optional service to the end buyer at any, that they could redeem at any point in the next 5 years. And that's the kind of way you deal with that, I think. If there are great watchmakers out there, and it's already a tough space to operate in, if you're a servicing watchmaker, an independent servicing watchmaker, I would much rather turn to them or to the brands than try and do that in-house, because there will inevitably be a significant limit on what we can do. And I can tell you from personal anecdotal evidence and knowledge that, a lot of the places that have in-house teams, unless they have enormous in-house teams and they're part of a huge group, those guys will still end up outsourcing a lot of their servicing to third parties. They just won't tell you. And so, I'd rather just have a good relationship with a really good servicing watchmaker or two and the brands and keep it that way.
Yeah, it's certainly the case here in Melbourne. I mean, the same guy does, I think, Patek and AP locally, and it's for obviously, logistical reasons as well. It could add shipping something back to Europe from Melbourne could add weeks and weeks to an already long process. So I'm sure there's plenty of reasons that they do that. Silas, you sort of mentioned your love for neo vintage. I think that a lot of people agree with you in this sort of wave of nostalgia that we are riding, especially sort of those 90s designs that continue into the early 2000s. Are we going to see a bunch of like A-series Hublot Big Bangs on Eclectic Man in the next few weeks? Is this what we can expect?
Frank Mueller, later Frank Mueller as well.
Are you offended?
I'm not offended. It's a fair question. And we put up an offshore yesterday, and lots of people said, "Oh, I'm surprised to see an offshore." It just so happens that we thought it was super cool, and
it is very
so
cool.
we wanted to kind of see where that took us. Look, you never say never, but I think that we're not. Right now we sell 5 watches a week, basically. It's a 1 watch a day. It's a very curated, very controlled process. We're definitely going to increase that in the future, because I think our biggest problem today, and I'm like, it's useful to even mention it now, is people just don't believe that we've sold the watches, before. Sorry, let me restart. People don't believe that the watches aren't sold before they go on Instagram, or that they sell, within a minute or two. They absolutely 100% genuinely do. We don't pre-sell watches. The best thing we might do is a couple of weeks before something that we know someone has been asking for an infinite amount of time. We might say to them, look, pay particular attention to the Instagram in the next couple of weeks. Something interesting might be coming up that you've mentioned before, but we never give details. We don't say what day, we don't say what time, etc., etc. And the bane of our life, although it's entirely self-created, so I should really just be blaming no one else but myself, is the kind of number of times people understandably get upset or irritated when they've messaged or DM'd a minute or two after something's gone live, or even where they've tried to check out, and they've bought the watch on their credit card, and the watch has literally been committed to a minute earlier, or has been sold a minute earlier, and there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, we had a similar situation last week, where we were in discussions with someone about a watch, and it was through Instagram DMs, and the process hadn't concluded, but they'd been, asking lots of intelligent questions, and we'd been answering as much as possible, but they hadn't committed to buy. But you could tell that they were, interested. It's just that we have a very strict policy. Unless you commit to buy, we don't reserve. Otherwise, we've been there and got the T-shirt, and we know the problems that creates. And someone, checked out on the website, and minutes after that had happened, the person saw that the person had checked out, and sorry, I apologize. The other way around. Someone had committed to the watch for a DM at the asking price, and then we told the person who was originally interested, and then they'd gone on the website and checked out because we hadn't been able to reserve it in time. And so we had to explain that we were really sorry, but we had to cancel the transaction because someone else had committed at asking price to take the watch, whereas we were still in the conversation and you hadn't committed, and it was ambiguous as to whether you were going to go for it or not, and we're really sorry. And literally the same day, something similar happened in the reverse. So someone was interested in buying something, and they wanted to go through the website, but they had questions, and somebody else was in DMs, and they just went through the website and bought it. The second person bought it through the website, and the other person missed it. And we had to explain that there was like, that you could see the timestamps. It was like a 1 minute difference between when they said they would take it and the 1 minute earlier that someone had transacted on the watch through the website, perfectly legitimately. And so it was unfortunate. It's very rare, but we get these situations all the time where people want something instantly, but they are 30 seconds too late or a minute too late, and you just have to apologize and say, look, I'm really sorry, but this is genuinely what happened. And we're working on ways to improve that in the future, to make it a little bit more equitable, and to make sure that people get a notification at the same time, probably through the medium of an app, so that they get notified when an article goes live or when a watch goes live, so that no matter where they are, as opposed to having to be on Instagram, they have the same instant opportunity to kind of check it out.
That's a very 2021 sort of problem to have, I suppose. And
yeah, I love that.
Stressful. I don't think I'd be cut out for the world of high-end watch sales. I don't think my heart could take it. And well done to you and everyone involved in dealing with what I can imagine are only very, very high-touch customer service, requirements. Silas, aware that we've taken almost an hour of your wonderful time, I just want to end by asking you a question about something other than watches. Have you got any recommendations for us or for people listening of something you've been enjoying, reading, consuming, watching that you would suggest?
So, very, very kind of sadly, I'm not dissimilar to Jasper. I don't have my life is altogether far too consumed with work, which is to my regret. But I have been reading, whilst I was away, I was reading No Filter by Sarah Freer, the story of Instagram, that had been recommended to me by about 5 different people. So I eventually downloaded it on the Kindle and started reading it on the beach. And I'm loving it, because I think the great thing about a book like that, where you go behind the scenes and you really hear everything from some really interesting perspectives, is that suddenly that medium that I've spent 7 years loving and hating at the same time in equal measure, and complaining about and praising almost as often, becomes just a little bit more personal, a little bit more real. And I get now, I totally get how things evolved, the problems that they faced, the kind of dynamic issues that they had with Facebook, etc., when they were acquired, and all the kind of problems that they had to solve, and the people that they upset along the way. I think it's a really fascinating story. I think it's interesting for anyone who has any kind of interest in business and e-commerce and entrepreneurship. And I think that it just kind of helps you almost get off your high horse a little bit, and recognize that behind everything are just humans, just people trying their best to do something that excites them, and to do it to the best of their ability in the vast majority of cases. Instagram is the perfect example. I, like everyone, get frustrated when the algorithm changes, and from one day to the next, you go from having 5,000 likes to having 500 on average for a month until it corrects again. But I get that there's a bigger picture. I get that there's more at play, and that there are many more things to consider, and that they grew from a tiny team, and they had to figure it out as they went along. And I just think it's a really fascinating book, so I'd recommend that. And then otherwise, I've just been watching I watch a lot of kind of like retro comedy, or English comedy that's kind of like not been out for a couple of years, like the IT Crowd.
Oh yeah.
And I've been watching that a lot, in addition to the Peep Show. Whenever I get the chance.
I was watching a bit of Kevin and Perry Go Large earlier today.
Yeah, goodness me. Yeah.
Wow.
That brings back memories.
Oh yeah.
I don't think I could do Peep Show again. It's like The Office. It's too uncomfortable to watch, but I love it.
It's great. I think I've watched the whole thing far too many times. But
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Mia
it's my safe
Friedman, an
space.
Aussie as well, author
Yeah.
of that book. So that's a great recommendation. Silas Walton,
Actually,
absolute.
Yes. Oh,
Actually, if I could throw one more thing,
it's got a light
just
one.
just a little bit of kind of
Hail Mary.
Local reference. I think it's The Rake, which is that Aussie barrister
Yep.
Sure. Sure.
show.
Yeah.
I have this weird thing of like going down a rabbit hole and discovering stuff that like, you know, is not necessarily on my local horizon, but I think I discovered The Rake whenever it was, about 6 months ago.
Richard
And I just made my way through the entire, like all of the seasons.
Yeah.
I really like that. But that's a bit of a kind of random one.
So if you like that, check out Mr. In Between, another Aussie series. Should be able to find it somewhere.
Cool. I'll do that.
Having worked for Australian barristers, Silas, I can confirm that it is 100% accurate.
Very good.
Silas Walton, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, we're having a drink on top of the Ned. Maybe next year. We really appreciate you taking the time, and that was a really enjoyable and thoughtful discussion.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
What a guy. What a gentleman.
What an honor.
Lovely fella.
Yeah,
Always a pleasure.
I find it fascinating how the secondary market has evolved over time, and it's really really interesting getting someone. Even I think Silas would agree that it's changed since he's been involved. It's wild.
It's fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on the show, Silas. As always, thank you to our sponsors, Nomos Glasute. Pleasure having you guys back. If you want to email Felix or I, otpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, ot.podcast.
Give us a follow, give us a share, give us a subscribe, give us a
5-star
review.
reviews. Join our Discord. It's just always a fun time there. Very wholesome energy. There's no trolls in there.
I mean, there are a few trolls, but their names are Andy and Felix. So
yeah, it's true. Sparking fights. All right, guys, we will see you next week.
Catch you later.